Okay, good morning, Doug. We're back with a Friday Q&A. Lots of great questions from people. We always appreciate your questions. Okay, so starting off at the top, Doug, someone asked about brokerages, and they want to know if you think brokerages might go woke and lock people out of their mining stocks, or that there might be government grabs directly at brokerage accounts as easy pickings.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of possible variations on this theme. Um, you might recall it was probably about 5 years ago when Refco, which was a clearing broker for commodities, went bust, and a lot of people lost their money because of John Corzine, who was the governor of New Jersey before this, billionaire, and he basically diverted customer funds. This has never been done before in history with commodity brokers, and he got away with it. So if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. But that's not the only example. I mean, look, it was about 7 years ago, 6 years ago, that Cyprus started. All the banks in Cyprus were bankrupt, and the government was bankrupt. So after the insurance, which of course was basically a fraud of 100,000 euros, everybody above 100,000 euros in their bank account got a huge haircut. It was called a bail-in. So that can happen. Your commodity account's not safe. Your bank account's not safe because most of the governments in the West also have bail-in provisions now for bank accounts, so that if the government uh, doesn't come up with print enough money to bail out banks, then large depositors take a haircut. And of course, back in 1933, Roosevelt locked down everybody's safe deposit box in the country, something people forget. You couldn't go in it without a government official who would check to see that you didn't have a lot of gold coins, which were then confiscated, and you were traded that for $20 bills as he raised the price of gold to $35. Um, and also during World War II, Roosevelt closed down uh, the gold mining industry in the U.S. As being non-essential. So that was about 4 years when all mines were closed down in the U.S. So yeah, anything can happen. They can do absolutely anything in the past, and now they have a lot more impetus to do so. So yeah, sure, anything can happen. But regarding mining stocks in particular, I'd like to think that we're safe for a few years anyway, a couple of years. And I think by then we could get into a real gold mining stock mania. So I'm heavily long gold stocks, but anything can happen. After all, when it comes to brokerage accounts, it's only the rich people that have brokerage accounts anyway. So the hoi polloi don't care what happens to the rich people. So
Right.
anything can happen is the answer.
Okay. Um, someone is there was a question about gold funds, like a Vanguard fund versus individual gold stocks, and we answered in the last episode we did. They were asking if there are any gold funds that anyone was aware of, like rather than I don't even know if Vanguard even has any anymore, to be honest. I think they probably shut down their gold exclusive fund 2 years ago, as if I recall. But I know that there are some index funds like GDX, which is a large gold miners index, and there's GDXJ, which is a junior mining index. Are there others that you're aware of? I know you focus specifically on specific stocks personally, but just in case, are you
Yeah, I
aware of
don't
any other
follow the
funds?
funds, quite frankly, because I feel that for a number of reasons, I can do a better job picking stocks than the employees of large funds. But I don't follow funds at all. I mean, in the past, the big distinction was between front load funds and no load funds. I don't even know if front load funds exist anymore, do they? Do brokers still
I
sell
don't think
those
so. I
things?
don't think so.
I kind of
I
doubt
don't
it.
think so.
They've gone away. Uh, what other differences are there with these funds? Well, expense ratios, which vary in other expenses. They can go from a fraction of a percent to about 2%. It's one thing to look at. Then you've got open end and closed end funds. I don't know of any closed end gold funds at this point. Whenever I do look at funds, the only thing I look at are closed end funds, which trade like stocks. Because sometimes you can buy them at a significant discount to their assets. But I don't think there's one for gold anymore. Look, I guess the answer to the question is I don't know. Uh, I'm sure there's open end gold funds around still, but I'm not the guy to ask because when I put my money into gold stocks, I do it either in the form of private placements for stocks that are already publicly trading, because that way I can buy the stock at a discount and usually, almost always, get a warrant, which allows me to buy more for up to 2 or 3 or 5 years. Uh, so, or I get into pre-public deals where guys are organizing a new gold company around a property, and that work usually works out pretty well too. So that's what everybody should do, but not everybody can do that because you've got to be in the room and in the deal. And it's hard for people that don't know the players to get in the room. It's a private party. Uh, I guess the little guy always winds up getting screwed. Well, anyway, there are 2,000 publicly traded gold stocks. Well over 90% of them are total crap. Promotions never work out. Uh, but there are quality gold stocks. Once you get beyond Barrick and Newmont, the big ones, there's lots of really competently run uh, mid-tier gold miners that produce anywhere from a couple 100,000 to maybe a couple million ounces per year. That's where I'd concentrate my mining. That's not a direct answer to the question, but that's the best I can do.
Well, I think it's good, and you named a few specific gold mining companies that you own in this special report that we put together, and you also give some more background about the way you think about gold stocks. And anybody can, in the description for this, you'll see a place if you just sign up for our email list, we'll email you that report, and you can see the specific recommendations that Doug made in there a few months ago. All right, next
Yeah,
question.
and we'll
So,
update that as
go ahead.
time goes on because the company's changed the fundamentals, so we ought to update that uh, more or less continually.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. So, Doug, there's this guy. He says he's a 43-year-old male in South Africa, and he found your comments on South Africa. Sadly, they were quite accurate, but he wants to know what your thoughts are on Namibia. I'm not saying that
Namibia.
right, or in particular Botswana, um, and what will happen to these countries when South Africa collapses.
Well, I've been to Namibia a number of times, as I have Botswana. Basically, they're desert countries. Well, not entirely. I mean, you've got the Akavango swamps in Botswana, and you go to the northern 10% of Namibia, it gets jungly. But they're big countries with low populations. So that makes them kind of interesting. And they don't have, at least I don't think they have, the kind of racial tensions that South Africa does. Uh, problem with Namibia, no, problem with Botswana is that its economy rotates around the diamond mines there. I mean, it's I guess it's historically one of the 2 or 3 African countries that's been pretty mellow and pretty successful. So not a bad choice. I've always liked Namibia because it's just so huge. I mean, you can buy a farm there. I mean, typical farm size is like 10,000 hectares, relatively cheaply. But it's a question of, yeah, they're okay. They're fine. I think they'll, I don't think the problems from South Africa are going to spill over there too seriously. But what's going to happen when South Africa collapses? Uh, that's anybody's guess. But I think you're better off in those places than you are in South Africa itself at this point. I really do. And they're not bad places. They're nice.
Okay. All right. Someone asks, they wonder if Doug could see a world where the principles outlined in the book, A Market for Liberty, can ever come to fruition.
Yeah, well, here's the problem. It's human nature, and all humans have these psychological aberrations in their minds that they picked up one way or another. And it results in irrational action, even as individuals, but especially when a bunch of humans get together. Then they go to the lowest common denominator, and things get really ugly. So, I guess speaking, actually it relates to the last question. The smaller the group that you're in, the better your chances of mellowness. Big groups are always dangerous. The bigger the group, the more dangerous. Look, even with the U.S., which was unique in its founding, the principles that were laid out in the Constitution, and especially, I've got to say, in the Declaration of Independence, much more than the Constitution. Actually, the Constitution, the only thing that's important in it is the Bill of Rights. But you've got to recall that the second president, Adams, put into effect the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it illegal to say anything that was insulting or negative about anybody in the government. So already the U.S. was starting to lose its basic founding principles. I mean, pretty closely after its founding. So cause for pessimism in the world today. I guess if you were a Caymanian and lived in Cayman, or even were a permanent resident in Cayman, place is pretty mellow for a lot of reasons, which no point in discussing now. And just recently, a Rhodesian friend of mine, I say Rhodesian because he spent his early life in Rhodesia before it became Zimbabwe. He's a real estate guy, and he's saying, well, the place to go is the Turks and Caicos. It's not cheap. It used to be quite cheap. It's not cheap anymore. But then I thought about it, and I talked with him some more, and he said, yeah, there's about 15,000 Turks citizens. It's an overseas possession of Britain, and he said, yeah, some of these guys want to get into politics and socialize the country. This is a small group, 15,000 people, prosperous because of all the outsiders that have come in because they like the beach. And then I thought, it could be worse than that because there's about 30 or 40,000 Haitians that have made their way to the Turks and Caicos. And they're the bottom of the barrel, and the local Turks, people who are almost all blacks, lord it over those Haitians. And there's a conflict between the two of them, and the rich white people that live on the beach try to stay out of it. But, at some point, as these Haitians have children, there's going to be trouble even in the mellow Turks and Caicos. So, look, we had one of these takes, I forget which one it was, on my hobby, which has been running around the world for 30 years, trying to find a small country, preferably with a military dictator or an ex-People's Republic that would like to turn their country into a new Hong Kong on steroids. Never had any success, just some fun. So to answer your question, I'm fairly pessimistic. about that. Although, here's a book recommendation, Neil Stephenson's book, Diamond Age, which talks about the near-term future when most nation states have disappeared or broken up severely. And the world is organized with philes, P-H-Y-L-E-S, where your countrymen are people that you share values with or interests with or whatever, as opposed to just the accident of birth where the guy next to you has the same government ID, so he's your countryman. Not a very good prescription for harmony. Philes, I find my countrymen are spread all over the world based on their character and their values as opposed to their government ID. So read that book. That might be helpful to amplify some of the thoughts in A Market for Liberty.
Great. Okay. Next question is following up on the discussion that we had last time about how libertarian-minded people often know a lot about policy and economics, at least in theory, but they spend their time in the world of ideas and they generally lack capital. Although, as you said before, Bitcoin has been very good for libertarians because a lot of them ideologically, participated in it early, and so it's kind of this windfall for a lot of them. But still, they generally have a lack of capital. So they ask what you or I would suggest people do to go about increasing their own capital. And they say it's kind of elementary, perhaps, and they have good investments, but they're always looking for a contrarian approach to acquiring more capital. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you create value? How do you actually build capital?
Well, a couple of general principles. There's 7 billion people in the world, and all of them have a near infinite demand for goods and services of every type. So you've got to reorient your thinking and think in terms of what goods and services can I provide to those 7 billion other people around the world. So you think in those terms as opposed to where can I get a job that somebody will give me. So it's a different way of thinking. And the other thing is just remember you have to produce more than you consume and save the difference. Saving the difference and allocating that capital will help you to get wealthy. But I'm not sure what the questioner is really looking for. Is he looking for a magic solution to?
Yeah, I mean, I hope not. I think that they're just wondering. People are brought up in this with this idea that it's about getting a good education and then getting a job, earning a good salary, and then putting away for retirement. I think that's kind of the system that most people are brought up in, and they think that that's the right approach. But even within that, like, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that exactly. But I think what people are missing from it is they're not understanding that as an employee entering a job market, you really are still, you're looking for an employer, who has problems that you can solve, and by you, providing goods or services to them, to your employer, you earn some of the extra value that's created. And it's I think people look at it instead of they look at it as getting a job and getting a salary, rather than looking at it as really they're trying to serve this global market with their own labor and their own expertise. And you can do it as an employee or not as an employee, but the whole point is really trying to create value, and that you have to, rather than looking for something and somebody gives something to you, you have to look around for the problems that you see around you, and whether they be, again, that there's a shortage of mining engineers in the world, and so you get an education in that, and then you go and you sort of shop your talents and skills, to the mining industry, or it be that you notice that especially during the height of COVID in New York City, garbage pickup wasn't occurring, for instance. And so, because the city workers were not coming into work. I'm sure they were still getting paid, but they weren't coming into work. Some enterprising people said, hey, there's a real problem. There's too much garbage in the neighborhood. Let's organize like some pickup trucks to go pick it up, and people will pay us and we'll take it to the dump. And that might not sound like a great way to create capital, but in truth, you're looking around and seeing the obvious problems and you're taking action to solve those problems. And those problems are all around us. I mean, we experience them every day. And if you can figure out how you can solve them for people, then you can trade that solution for capital.
I was just thinking just now, as you mentioned the New York garbage problem, it's that one good thing about this COVID hysteria is that it's drawn the low quality of teachers and schools to people's attention in a number of ways, if their kids even can go to schools, which is kind of good that they don't because they're just indoctrination camps a lot of the time. But if you've got a good education and you can think rationally, you might round up friends and neighbors whose kids are sitting around playing video games in their basement and say, look, for X number of dollars per month, I promise to give your kids a much better education than they're going to get in their government schools. Okay, that's creating a job for yourself by creating value, and everybody wins. It's a win-win-win type of thing. So thinking laterally, but you got to work. You actually got to get out there. Look, for years I said, and I think I was accurate, that if I was parachuted into the jungle in the Congo, that in a couple of years, I'd be doing pretty well. Although in places like that, frankly, to do well, it's political entrepreneurship more than anything else for a number of reasons. But I'm too fat and lazy to do that now, so strike that. That would have been for some years ago. But I suggest everybody try to find that Uncle Scrooge comic book with the fish, where Donald Duck convinces Uncle Scrooge that all his money is worthless, all his gold and silver is worthless by government decree, and he's bankrupt. So what does the old duck do? He goes down to the port and catches a fish and sells it for something else. And by the end of the day, he's got a bin full of fish. So, he's a fish millionaire again. Then he finds out that Donald was lying to him, and he dumps carloads of fish on Donald's house to teach him a lesson. Anyway, it's a wonderful little story that Karl Barks wrote, Uncle Scrooge comic books. They're very sound. But that's the answer to the question, I think.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Next question here is about gold and silver coins. Like, how do you make sure that you're actually getting what you pay for? When you're buying these things online, for instance, how do you make sure that if you want to buy, 10 ounces of silver or 10 American Eagle gold coins, how do you make sure you're getting the right what you intend to buy? How do you avoid being taken advantage of?
Well, it's actually problematical. Not so much with silver, because the value of silver, even at $25 an ounce where it is, isn't high enough to make it worth the trouble and the risk of counterfeiting silver coins. And I just bought a whole bunch of U.S. silver Liberty rounds just yesterday. Can't have enough of them at this point. But what's the answer to the question, really? Don't worry about silver too much. And in gold, for a number of reasons, I limit my buying now to quarter-ounce coins, preferably 19th century European gold, things like British sovereigns and French louis d'ors and German 20 mark pieces and Swiss vernelles, this type of thing. They're from 0.18 to, in the case of European gold, to 0.23 in the case of the sovereign ounces per coin. They're small. They look like nickels, dimes. So if you're crossing a border with them, people don't pay attention with them. They just figure that you've got some loose change somehow wound it up in your briefcase. And nobody counterfeits those, and they have some numismatic value. But yeah, it's a problem, because the way it works is that for new bullion gold, there are scamsters, mainly in the Orient, that take tungsten, which has the same specific gravity as gold, and therefore, when you measure it and weigh it, if it's plated with gold, it's basically indistinguishable from gold, and do frauds that way. So I've never seen one of these tungsten rounds myself. My suspicion is that if you dropped it on a piece of marble, it would sound a lot different from a gold coin that you dropped on that piece of marble. That might be the best, easiest way to detect it without the aid of a chemistry lab. But yeah, it's a problem, but not a big problem. I think it's an overblown problem. And you got to remember that in the US Constitution, which is a dead letter, but there are only 3 federal crimes listed. I mean, there's 5 or 6,000 separate federal crimes. Now, I'm probably underestimating it. But at the founding of the country, there were only 3: counterfeiting, treason, and piracy. And of course, now the Federal Reserve is the world's biggest counterfeiter. So anyway, counterfeiting is a serious crime, punishable by death in many cases. But, now forget about it. Practical answer, I guess, small gold coins.
All right.
I never buy bars. Certainly not the big
And also
bars.
right. And the risk goes way up in because it's easier if you're going to counterfeit something to counterfeit a large something at 10 kilograms. It'd be much better than trying to do the different individual coins. Also, buying through a reputable dealer is a good way of doing it, rather than from some stranger online. You want to buy from somebody who has a decades-long reputation in the industry. I know that you probably know a ton of them, that you'd recommend. But is there anybody in particular that comes to mind that you feel is a reputable dealer?
Well, interestingly, when I was going to, and I'm not sure what my Confederate who actually did it for me, when I bought a bunch of U.S. silver Liberty coins, the best price he checked around was from a group called SWP in the Cayman Islands. And I said, well, yeah, that's probably true, but that won't work because I want them shipped to the U.S. And he said, well, that's only $50 for 1,000 ounces. Rather shocking. I don't see how they could do it.
Wow.
Check into that because they had the lowest price. I'm not sure that shipping cost was quite correct, but I'll know more in a few days. And I like the idea
amazing.
of buying this stuff outside.
Okay, next question. At one point.
Oh, yeah, we do have a comp lag here, don't we?
Yeah, what is it that you like buying it outside of the country?
I think it's more private because when you wire the money to a bank or a broker outside the country, the government can't access their records as to exactly what you bought as easily as they can with the domestic. That's the only reason I can think of. And it gets you into the habit of dealing internationally too. Second possible reason.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so someone asks, at one point you said Panama could be a good place to go, but since its currency is US dollar, will it suffer more than other countries in Central or in Latin America when we have a dollar crisis?
No, I don't think so, because Panama is a very international place, and it's true. The dollar is the currency. They have the Panamanian. What do they call it? They call it a colon. I forget. So they've got some local currency circulating too, but I wouldn't worry about it for the near term anyway. But the good thing about Panama, if you're going to choose any place in Central America or even Latin America, is that it's pretty developed and pretty convenient and pretty international. So I think for those reasons, it'll do better than many places. But who knows? I mean, don't forget the U.S. invaded Panama, what was it, 25 years ago to dethrone somebody that used to be their BFF, Manuel Noriega. So anything can happen anywhere. Yeah, I think when we invaded Panama, I think there were the number. I never came out, but I think there were a couple thousand natives that got killed in that little adventure.
That's what I heard too. I heard that from Panamanians. I'd never heard that while living in the U.S. I'd only heard it, from people who lived through it in Panama. It was pretty surprising to hear, actually.
Yeah, quite
Let's see.
amazing
Next
actually.
question is.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. We do have a little bit of a delay here. Let's see. So the next question was, when the U.S. breaks apart, how would the breakup appear on the world stage? And would other countries acknowledge it, or would it lead to more conflict and occupation? For instance, maybe China comes into America to restore order after a collapse, or would it be a Red Dawn kind of invasion situation? It's a lot of speculation, but what are your thoughts?
Well, you got to look at past examples of breakups. When the Soviet Union broke up into 15 different countries, it was peaceful. When Yugoslavia broke up into 6 different countries, it wasn't peaceful, at least between some of them. Czechoslovakia broke up into the Czech Republic and Slovakia, totally peaceful. North and South Sudan separated into those 2 countries, which was inevitable and necessary because they're totally different. Arabs in the north and blacks in the south, and it was a horrible situation. But since they separated, it's been relatively peaceful. East Timor, which broke off from Indonesia, I don't know how long ago that was, 10 years, and I forget what the Indonesian. I think the Indonesians tried to put it down. Anyway, it's funny. There's all these things happening around the world, and most of us just don't actually know what's actually happened in a lot of these obscure places. Of course, when the South seceded from the U.S. in 1861, that should have and could have been peaceful and would have been a good thing, but it wasn't. Central governments don't like it when parts of them split off. Well, Taiwan from mainland China's kind of a current question that needs to be resolved. But here's the thing: it's that conquest isn't what it used to be. I mean, in the old days, the ancient world certainly, conquest was a good idea. If you invaded a country and beat their army, you got to, steal a lot of slaves, especially the women, and they had a lot of market value. You got to steal all their gold, steal all their artwork, steal all their cattle, and bring them back home. So, war was a pretty interesting economic proposition. And then you got to tax them after that. But as the Romans found, after a while, it turned out to not be such a good idea because you get these long borders, and then you've got to defend that place against the barbarians that are coming from the other side. And then you got to put down rebels and secessionists in that country. So what are the chances of the Chinese army invading the U.S., maybe as a peacekeeping force? Well, anything can happen. Not in the near term, I don't think. But look, I'm a believer in anything you can imagine can probably happen. It's just a question of the odds. So I guess that's the answer, such as it is. Nobody knows.
Okay, so the next question is a young man who he's 26. He's a entrepreneur, and he's just wondering if it makes sense to live, somewhere in rural Tennessee, or instead to try and get outside of the U.S. He says his wife is Hungarian or has Hungarian dual citizenship, but he doesn't qualify quite yet. He's currently in Virginia. He has low six figures in cash. He says so nothing crazy, but that's honestly pretty impressive for a 26-year-old. He was thinking of buying a home and that he can live in and maybe rent out at the same time in rural Tennessee, and it gives him backup cash flow options. Basically, he's just wondering, does it make more sense for him to try to get in rural Tennessee or try and leave the U.S. As a young entrepreneur? It sounds like his business is portable, where he could really be anywhere.
Yeah. One big problem is the language problem, because you go to someplace, if you can't communicate with the locals, it makes it hard. So even in the case of Hungary, where your wife speaks Hungarian, I'm sure, I understand it's a very hard language to learn because I'm not even sure it's a member of the Indo-European group. It's an oddball language like Lithuanian. Um, that makes it really hard when you can't communicate with people, which incidentally is why Apple and Google and those people are so dangerous, because if they can keep you from communicating with people, that really limits a lot of what you can do. So that's one of the disadvantages of moving outside the country. It's harder to make things outside of your own culture. It's why people tend to stay in their country unless they're really desperate or unless they're drawn to a place by the benefits. I guess we'll find out, because there's going to be millions and millions of poor people from all over the world that are going to come to the United States in the future. So I guess they'll make it, and if they can make it here, you can make it there. And I've talked about that. We've talked about that in past episodes of this.
Yep.
What to do? I don't know. I take out a 30-year fixed rate mortgage on my house. That's one thing that you can do, because that'll be inflated out of existence. Give you more cash to do something with now. It's a good question. I mean, Tennessee, I hear good things about Tennessee from a tax and freedom point of view. I mean, Davy Crockett, born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, freest state in the land of the free. I don't know if they sing that little song anymore. We used to sing it as kids in the 50s. But hard to say. What do you think, Matt?
Boy, it just depends upon so many specifics of this person, but I really think the most important thing is to try and put yourself in a position where you have more buffer from the short-term risks that are out there, and try and have more options for the future. So like for me, it was getting out of a major city and just living, away from, any problems that were emerging in the city that I was living in. It was clear there was certainly crime that was going up, basic things like that, even just getting further away from that. So I think a little buffer is helpful, which you could probably achieve that in Tennessee. And, maybe you can find people that are of more like mind to you. Honestly, I know a lot of people who have moved recently to Tennessee. I know half a dozen people actually that have moved to Tennessee in the last year through all of this. So maybe there's some of that, but I also think it's really important to keep your options open generally, because it's very difficult to say what the world might look like 6 months from now or a year from now. And, you pulling the trigger on an international situation could make a lot of sense.
Yes, at least to stick your foot in the water internationally. So after the current lockdown ends, I presume it will, and it'll still be hard. It'll be harder to travel because of COVID passports and God knows what else. But I would start getting on a plane at least a couple or three times a year and investigating likely foreign places that you might want to move into, just in case. And I wrote a
Great.
lot about
Okay.
this. I wrote a lot about this in in a book called Crisis Investing for the 90s, which is a very different book from crisis investing and strategic investing. So it's out of print, but it's available on the internet. So you can get it there. In fact, I even have a PDF copy of it that we can send you. So if you want it, get that. And also, I have a blog called internationalman.com, and you ought to go there because there's a lot of stuff on all this in written form on internationalman.com. So, two suggestions.
Great. All right. I will link to International Man in the description, and if you don't mind distributing that PDF, if you send me a copy of it, I could send it to everybody who's on our email list.
Yeah, why not? The book's out of print, so sure, good idea. Still pretty good.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Next question was asking about learning other languages other than English. Do you recommend Chinese as a language for the future, or is there any other language that you would recommend somebody learn to make them more competitive as an individual in the future?
Yeah, look, it's too hard. Well, look, I'm not a good linguist, but it's really too hard to learn a language competently. Like, well, maybe not. One of my favorite people in history is Sir Richard Burton, who, along with Richard Speake, discovered the source of the Nile. Burton did all kinds of incredible things in the 19th century. He's a classic Renaissance man from many points of view. And of Burton, it's said that he spoke, let me see if I've got this right. He spoke 10 languages fluently and 15 more reasonably well. And that distinction between fluency and reasonably well, I mean, this is quite amazing. So, yeah, it can be done. But look, I had a good friend in high school who, very smart guy, and he decided that he wanted to become a linguist. And he became totally fluent in French, and I think he's fluent in German, and maybe he's picked up a couple others since then. But has it helped him in life? Eh, yeah, sure. It always helps to know more. You can communicate with more people, more opportunities, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is, sad to say, or happy to say, that everybody that's educated in the world speaks English as a second language. So they come to you. You don't have to come to them. Point number one. Point number two is that here's what I think. It's that if you could learn the 500 basic words, like 25 basic verbs and the rest nouns and the structure of the language in a lot of languages, you're way ahead of the game than trying to become an expert and fluent in any one. And learning 500 words in any language is not that hard. I mean, my French, my German is kind of passable, even though I never speak German, but I can communicate in German, no problem. Of course, it's easy in German because the first 500 words are all cognates of English. That's a no-brainer. My French is okay once I groove into it for a few hours. My Spanish isn't even as good as my French, which is strange because I've been living in the Spanish-speaking world for years. I guess I don't need to speak Spanish because everybody I talk to speaks perfect English, and my basic Spanish, those 500 words, or maybe in my case a couple thousand, are adequate. And I'm lazy, and there's other things to do. Chinese is hard.
All right. Chinese is really hard. Okay, so there's a book in the book Creature from Jekyll Island. The author talks about the agenda of the government to destroy residential real estate so that it can be government owned. I wonder if what we're witnessing today is Is that essentially coming true? What are your thoughts on that?
Look, the collectivists and the statists have learned that it's a lot easier not to own the means of production, which is what Marx was talking about, the means of production. He didn't really care about consumer goods like houses and cars. That was trivial. But governments have learned that owning the means of production is a formula for disaster and collapse. So that's why we have fascism around the world, where these things are all privately owned and run and traded on stock exchanges. But the government just, you know, takes as much of the profits as they possibly can. So based on that, I don't think you have to worry too much about houses and that. On the other hand, you're dealing with criminal personalities that just like to screw things up and dominate other people. And of course, as a lot of people lose their houses and get kicked out of apartments and God knows what in the next few years, maybe the government will own those things. Disaster. I mean, anything happens. You're dealing with crazy people. You're dealing with the criminally insane that are now more than ever running the government. Anything can happen. Not a real danger. Not for you, I'm sure, writing in here, but could happen. For political reasons, not
Okay,
economic.
we had two people actually. Got it. For political reasons. That makes sense. So two people actually wrote in asking about the birds that sing in the background there at your house. Do you know what kind of bird that is, that we hear occasionally in the background?
I don't. I do look out the window. Here, wait, perhaps you can see. You're looking at a giant soybean field out there, incidentally.
Very nice.
Yeah, no soybeans at the moment, and no cattle at the moment either. I hope somebody hasn't stolen the herd. It's possible. Uh, yeah, I look out there and I watch the birds squabbling and fighting for mates and singing and all this stuff. It's very amusing. I don't know what kind they are, quite frankly. I'm not a bird watcher,
Hmm.
but interesting question. I was
Got it.
unaware the microphone was picking them up.
Yeah, no, we hear them all the time in the background, actually, and it's great. Somebody actually thought they were in my place, and I'm like, I'm in a closed, library here. There is definitely no birds in here. They're coming from Doug's. So let's see. Last question we had for you for today was someone asking, when you went back to South America a few weeks ago, were you required to take a COVID test on arrival? Can you just explain what that process was?
Well, it varies with every country. And as I've said before, getting from Washington, D.C., Dulles, where I left, to Montevideo, where I arrived, I kind of felt like it must have been Saigon in 1975. It was chaos. I mean, I didn't even, just to be sure, we took one of these ridiculous COVID tests. It cost $150 for each of us, incidentally. Uh, it was good for 72 hours. And we arrived, and I didn't even know. Well, if we hadn't done that, we just did it because we thought, well, anything can happen. American Airlines wouldn't have let us on the damn plane. And we would have been stuck. I don't know where we would have been stuck. Would it have been in DC or in Miami? And then we would have had to got. It's just chaos. And of course, you got here to Uruguay, and this was just before they shut down again. I mean, all these countries are shutting down, opening up, partially opening up. So you don't know what's going on. So we had to, sign some things of testing and all this. It's traveling is a nightmare now. I mean, there must be a few places. You went to Colombia, and it wasn't so bad. You didn't need to show a COVID test, and they didn't make you.
Well, no, they didn't do that. But I will say that because things are constantly changing, the airline personnel were very confused about what we had to do. They thought that we had to download. I mean, we talked to the person who checked us in. into allowing us to go forward, even though we didn't have this, but because I couldn't. But she said that we had to have a QR code issued by Colombia before they could let us on the plane. So we had to download some app and answer some questions, and we weren't in fact required to do that. We weren't required, but she thought we were, and she was very worried about letting us continue, to board our first flight, because she was worried that she would lose her job if it was found out that she let us on without us having this QR code, which didn't exist. I mean, it was impossible to get. So there's a lot of confusion, and with everything changing constantly, with the standards changing constantly for every country, I just feel like if you're going to travel, you have to be prepared for total chaos where people aren't, even if they're trying to follow the rules, and even if those rules are clear to you as a traveler, the airline personnel, you got to count on them being somewhat clueless, because keeping track of all the different countries and all the changing rules, it's got to be difficult. But it sucks. It
Yeah,
sucked.
you're absolutely
And also
right.
wearing a
So,
mask for 18 hours a day, it sucked.
yeah, I know. So it's pretty clear that what's looming in our future is some type of a chipping on your body if you want to go anywhere, and if you want to qualify under the coming social credit system, showing that you're a good citizen. So I think it's going to get rather dystopian, quite frankly.
Unfortunately, I agree. Okay, well, that's all the questions for this week. So I appreciate all the questions again. To submit some for next week, just download the Telegram app and follow us on there and submit the questions through the app. It'll also give us a second form of communication so that if something happens to our YouTube channel or whatever, we'll be able to still interact. So
Yeah,
with
I
that, we'll
mean,
leave it there. Thank you very much, Doug. I hope you have a great weekend.
thanks.